Welcome back to English Lane. Today we are telling the story of a tournament so large that more people on Earth watch its final match than follow any single religion, any single political system, or any single language. Every 4 years, factories pause, city streets fall quiet, and strangers who share no common language suddenly share one common feeling: hope for their national team. That tournament is the FIFA World Cup, and its story began not with a powerful government or a wealthy corporation, but with one stubborn, romantic Frenchman who genuinely believed a simple game could bring the entire world closer together. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how a tournament that nearly collapsed before its very first match grew into the most widely watched sporting event in human history. You will learn about a trophy hidden from the Nazis inside a shoebox, a national heartbreak so painful an entire country still speaks of it in hushed tones decades later, a stolen trophy found by an ordinary dog, and a tournament that has now grown so large it welcomes teams from every corner of the globe. As always here on English Lane, listen carefully to the simple words and the steady, clear pace. This is graded reader-style English, designed to help your listening skills grow naturally, the same way a child slowly absorbs a new language, through story, through meaning, and through gentle repetition. Get comfortable, and let's travel back nearly 100 years to a small cafe in Paris where this entire story quietly began. And if stories like this one help your English grow, please subscribe to English Lane so you never miss the next journey we take together. Chapter 1. A romantic idea from an unlikely man. Jules Rimet was born the son of a grocer in a small village in eastern France, a modest beginning that gave no early indication of the global legacy he would eventually leave behind. Through hard work and genuine determination, young Jules earned a scholarship to study law, gradually climbing well beyond the humble circumstances of his childhood. Alongside his legal career, Rimet developed a deep, genuine passion for football, co-founding a sports club in Paris built around values he cared about deeply: cooperation, fairness, and equality among people from vastly different backgrounds. In 1921, Rimet became president of FIFA, football's international governing body. Unlike many leaders who focus primarily on practical, day-to-day administration, Rimet was, at his core, a genuine romantic. He looked at football, a game played in dusty backstreets and modest working-class stadiums across 5 different continents, and saw something considerably larger than simple entertainment. He saw a potential diplomatic instrument, a shared language capable of connecting people who otherwise had almost nothing else in common. This particular vision mattered enormously, especially considering the era in which Rimet was working. Europe had only recently emerged from the devastating destruction of the First World War, a conflict that had torn nations apart along painful, bitter lines. Rimet genuinely believed that a shared international sporting competition, one that brought different nations together in peaceful, structured competition, could help heal at least some of that same painful division, even if only in a small, symbolic way. There is something worth sitting with here, right at the very beginning of this remarkable story. The FIFA World Cup did not begin as a calculated business venture designed purely to generate profit. It began as one man's genuinely sincere belief that a simple game, played with nothing more than a ball and open space, held the quiet power to bring an entire fractured world a little closer together. Chapter 2. A vote that changed sport forever. For years, international football competition had existed primarily within the framework of the Olympic Games, but Rimet grew increasingly convinced that football deserved its own dedicated, independent tournament, entirely separate from the Olympics and their particular restrictions regarding amateur status. On May 28, 1928, at FIFA's Congress held in Amsterdam, Rimet formally proposed his ambitious idea that FIFA should organize and host its very own standalone World Championship tournament. The proposal was bold, considering the immense logistical and financial challenges involved in organizing a genuinely international tournament during this particular era. Yet FIFA's members ultimately agreed, and the decision was formally approved. This single vote, cast in a meeting room in Amsterdam, quietly set in motion everything that would eventually follow: a tournament that would one day be watched by more than 3 billion people worldwide, an extraordinary figure representing nearly half of the Earth's entire population. The next crucial question involved selecting a suitable host nation for this ambitious new tournament. Uruguay presented a genuinely compelling case. The small South American nation had already won football gold at both the 1924 and 1928 Olympic Games, establishing itself as a genuine footballing power despite its modest size. Uruguay was also preparing to celebrate the centennial anniversary of its first constitution in 1930, and the nation's government generously offered to personally cover the travel expenses of every participating team, a genuinely significant gesture given the difficult economic conditions of the era. This particular chapter reveals something worth remembering about how transformative ideas frequently take shape. A single formal proposal, presented confidently at exactly the right moment, followed by genuine institutional courage to actually approve something entirely untested, can quietly set enormous world-changing events into motion, long before anyone involved could possibly imagine the eventual scale of what they had just decided to create. Chapter 3. A perilous journey across the Atlantic. Once Uruguay had been formally selected as host, an entirely new, considerably more practical challenge quickly emerged. Convincing European nations to actually make the long, expensive, and genuinely difficult journey across the Atlantic Ocean during the depths of the Great Depression proved remarkably difficult. Many European football associations expressed genuine reluctance, citing the considerable expense, the lengthy travel time required, and general uncertainty regarding this entirely unprecedented tournament. Ultimately, only 4 European nations agreed to make the journey: France, Belgium, Romania, and Yugoslavia. France's participation was owed largely to Rimet's own French nationality and considerable personal influence. Romania's participation involved a particularly memorable story, as King Carol II reportedly took personal interest in the national squad, personally selecting several players himself and guaranteeing that any player who traveled would not lose their regular job while away competing. In June 1930, these 4 European squads, along with FIFA's official delegation, boarded a single ship called the SS Conte Verde, departing from the French Riviera. Rimet himself made this journey, personally carrying the tournament's newly created trophy throughout the entire 2-week Atlantic crossing. A beautiful golden figure depicting Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, carefully packed for the long voyage. The ship carried, quite literally, the entirety of Europe's participation in this brand new tournament aboard a single vessel. Picture this scene honestly for a moment. The world's very first global football tournament nearly failed to happen at all, not because of any lack of genuine enthusiasm for football itself, but because of the simple, practical difficulty of actually getting teams from different continents into the same location at the same time. There is something worth remembering here. Even history's most celebrated, seemingly inevitable institutions frequently began as genuinely fragile, uncertain experiments, one difficult logistical problem away from potentially never happening at all. Chapter 4. The First Champions. The inaugural FIFA World Cup finally began on July 13, 1930, held in Montevideo, Uruguay, with construction on the tournament's main stadium, the Estadio Centenario, still being urgently completed even as the very first matches were already underway. 13 national teams ultimately participated, 7 from South America, 4 from Europe, and 2 from North America. A considerably smaller gathering than modern tournaments, yet a genuinely historic, unprecedented achievement for its particular era. Uruguay, playing before their own passionate home supporters, advanced steadily through the tournament, eventually meeting rival Argentina in the historic final match. Before a crowd of approximately 68,000 enthusiastic fans, Uruguay ultimately triumphed by a score of 4-2, becoming football's first ever official World Cup champion, fittingly crowned during the very same year their nation celebrated its own centennial anniversary of independence. This inaugural tournament established patterns and traditions that would continue shaping the World Cup for the following century. The tension between fierce national rivalry and genuine international friendship. The powerful emotional weight carried by a single, decisive final match. The image of an entire nation celebrating together, joined temporarily in shared, collective joy regardless of individual differences in background, wealth, or personal circumstance. Interestingly, the tournament also established a curious early tradition regarding the actual ball used during the final. Because both finalists arrived with genuine, strongly held preferences regarding which specific ball should be used, organizers ultimately agreed to a rather unusual compromise, playing the first half with a ball provided by Argentina and the second half with a ball provided by Uruguay. Argentina led at halftime using their own preferred ball, while Uruguay ultimately triumphed during the second half, played with their own. Whether pure coincidence or not, this small, curious detail has remained a cherished, frequently retold piece of World Cup folklore for nearly a century since. There is a valuable insight worth remembering from this particular founding chapter. Uruguay's victory was never simply about football skill alone. However genuinely impressive that skill certainly was. It represented the very first tangible proof that Rimet's original, somewhat romantic vision could actually work in genuine practice, that a shared game truly could unite different nations, even briefly, around one single common purpose. Chapter 5. A trophy hidden from the Nazis. As the World Cup continued growing steadily in size and popularity throughout the 1930s, a devastating global catastrophe once again threatened to interrupt football's growing international story. The outbreak of the Second World War forced FIFA to cancel the tournaments originally scheduled for both 1942 and 1946, as much of the world's attention and resources became entirely consumed by war rather than sport. During this dangerous, uncertain period, the World Cup trophy itself faced genuine, serious danger. Italy, having won the tournament in both 1934 and 1938, held physical possession of the trophy as Europe descended into devastating war. As Nazi forces occupied northern Italy, an Italian football official named Ottorino Barassi took an extraordinary personal risk, secretly hiding the valuable trophy inside an ordinary shoebox, which he then kept concealed beneath his own bed throughout the remainder of the war, protecting it from potential Nazi seizure. This particular story reveals something genuinely moving about how deeply people had already come to value this relatively young tournament, barely a decade into its existence, by the time war threatened to destroy it. An ordinary football official was willing to personally risk considerable danger, hiding a golden trophy in his own bedroom throughout an entire devastating war, simply to ensure that this fragile symbol of international sporting unity would genuinely survive to see peacetime again. There is something worth remembering from this particular wartime chapter. Even institutions built specifically around peace, unity, and friendly competition remain genuinely vulnerable to the wider, often devastating forces of history. Yet the fact that ordinary individuals were willing to personally protect this particular symbol, at real personal risk, suggests something genuinely important about how deeply shared, unifying institutions can come to matter within relatively surprisingly short periods of time. Chapter 6. The Wound That Never Healed. Following the devastating interruption of the Second World War, the World Cup resumed in 1950, hosted for the first time by Brazil. This particular tournament produced what remains, to this very day, one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire history of the sport, an event still remembered vividly across an entire nation, decades after it originally occurred. Brazil entered the tournament's decisive final match against neighboring Uruguay as overwhelming favorites, playing before an enormous home crowd inside the newly constructed Maracanã Stadium, with attendance figures reportedly exceeding an astonishing 200,000 spectators. Brazilian newspapers had already confidently printed victory headlines in advance. Commemorative medals celebrating Brazil's anticipated triumph had reportedly already been prepared. Yet Uruguay, defying every expectation, ultimately defeated Brazil by a score of 2-1, claiming their second World Cup title in stunning, heartbreaking fashion, directly inside Brazil's own celebratory home stadium. This shocking, devastating defeat became known throughout Brazil simply as the Maracanazo, a word that continues carrying genuine emotional weight within Brazilian culture even today, more than 7 decades later. Some accounts describe genuine national mourning following the match, with reports of Brazilian supporters experiencing profound, lasting psychological distress. The Brazilian goalkeeper that day, a man named Moacir Barbosa, reportedly carried the weight of this single match for the remainder of his entire life. Said to have later remarked that under Brazilian law, the maximum sentence for any crime was 30 years. Yet he had already been quietly punished for considerably longer than that for a mistake he had made in a single football match. The tragedy became so deeply woven into national memory that it profoundly shaped Brazilian football culture for decades that followed, contributing directly to the country's eventual historic decision to change its national team's traditional white uniform to the now iconic yellow and green colors still worn proudly today. There is a genuinely important truth worth sitting with here. The same tournament capable of producing extraordinary unifying national joy is equally capable of producing extraordinary lasting national heartbreak. This particular emotional intensity, cutting powerfully in both directions, helps explain precisely why the World Cup carries such genuinely profound cultural significance across so many different nations, well beyond the simple boundaries of the sport itself. Chapter 7. A Dog Named Pickles and a Stolen Cup. By 1966, when England hosted the World Cup for the first time, the tournament had grown into a genuinely major global spectacle, closely followed across dozens of countries. Just months before the tournament's opening match, however, an entirely unexpected crisis emerged. The valuable World Cup trophy, then on public display at an exhibition in London, was suddenly, mysteriously stolen. The theft caused considerable public alarm and genuine embarrassment for the host nation, threatening to overshadow the entire upcoming tournament before it had even properly begun. Remarkably, the missing trophy was eventually recovered, not through sophisticated police investigation, but through a rather unlikely hero. A dog named Pickles, belonging to an ordinary London resident, discovered the missing trophy hidden beneath a garden hedge while out on an entirely ordinary evening walk, wrapped inside a discarded newspaper. This particular incident, genuinely almost comical in hindsight, nonetheless carried real significant relief for tournament organizers. England went on to host a remarkably successful tournament that same year, ultimately winning their own first, and to this day their only World Cup title, defeating West Germany in a thrilling, dramatic final match played before their own enthusiastic home supporters. There is a lighter, but still genuinely valuable insight worth remembering from this particular story. Even history's most serious, prestigious institutions occasionally experience moments of genuine, unexpected absurdity. And these particular moments, however unlikely, frequently become cherished. Beloved parts of an institution's overall story, remembered fondly for generations, precisely because they reveal something genuinely human and relatable beneath an otherwise formal, serious occasion. Chapter 8. Brazil keeps the cup forever. Brazil's painful 1950 heartbreak eventually gave way to genuine, extraordinary triumph across the following 2 decades. Led by the emerging genius of a young player named Pelé, who first announced his extraordinary talent to the world as a 17-year-old during the 1958 tournament. Brazil won the World Cup in 1958, then again in 1962, and finally, remarkably, once more in 1970, becoming the first nation in football history to claim 3 separate World Cup titles. That 1970 Brazilian squad, featuring Pelé alongside other legendary players, is still widely regarded by many football historians as among the greatest national teams ever assembled in the sport's entire history. This particular third championship carried special, additional significance. Jules Rimet himself had originally declared, decades earlier, that any nation achieving 3 separate World Cup victories would be permanently awarded the tournament's original trophy to keep forever, rather than simply borrowing it temporarily as previous champions had done. Brazil's historic 1970 triumph, therefore, meant the original Jules Rimet trophy, the very same golden figure that had crossed the Atlantic aboard the SS Conte Verde back in 1930, now permanently belonged to Brazil. Sadly, this celebrated trophy story eventually took a genuinely tragic turn. In 1983, the Jules Rimet trophy was stolen once again, this time from the headquarters of Brazil's own football confederation in Rio de Janeiro. Unlike the earlier English theft resolved so fortunately by a helpful dog, this particular trophy was never recovered, and it is widely believed to have eventually been melted down entirely by the thieves responsible. There is something genuinely bittersweet worth remembering from this particular chapter. The very trophy that had once been so carefully protected from Nazi forces, hidden beneath a bed throughout an entire devastating war, was ultimately lost, not to the destructive forces of war, but to ordinary criminal greed during peacetime. Even our most cherished, carefully protected symbols remain genuinely vulnerable, and their preservation frequently depends on continued, ongoing human care and vigilance, rather than any guaranteed permanent safety. Chapter 9. A reminder of how much the game truly means. Not every World Cup memory carries a lighthearted or celebratory tone, and honesty about this particular story requires acknowledging its genuinely darker moments as well. During the 1994 tournament, hosted in the United States, a Colombian defender named Andrés Escobar accidentally scored a goal into his own team's net during a group stage match, an unfortunate mistake that contributed directly to Colombia's unexpectedly early elimination from a tournament they had originally entered as one of the favorites. Tragically, shortly after returning home following the tournament, Escobar was murdered, with many observers directly connecting the tragedy to lingering anger surrounding that single unfortunate incident on the field. This devastating tragedy stands as a genuinely sobering reminder that the World Cup's enormous emotional power, capable of producing extraordinary unity and joy across entire nations, occasionally reveals a considerably darker side as well. One where sporting disappointment becomes tragically, disproportionately entangled with real, permanent human consequence, far beyond anything any game should ever reasonably demand of the people who play it. Football's global governing bodies, and the wider football community itself, have since worked to more openly acknowledge these darker moments alongside the tournament's many celebrated triumphs, recognizing honestly that genuine love for this game, at its most extreme and least healthy expression, can occasionally produce real harm rather than the shared unity it was always originally intended to represent. Remembering this particular story alongside the tournament's many celebrated triumphs helps preserve a genuinely complete, honest picture of exactly how much this simple game has come to mean to people across the entire world, for better and, occasionally, for considerably worse. Chapter 10. Opening the World. For its first several decades, the World Cup remained heavily dominated by European and South American nations, with countries from Africa, Asia, and North America frequently struggling to secure meaningful representation within the tournament's relatively limited overall structure. Beginning in the 1970s and continuing steadily through subsequent decades, FIFA gradually worked to expand the tournament, deliberately increasing the total number of participating nations and actively working to include previously underrepresented regions from across the globe. In 1994, the United States hosted the World Cup for the very first time, a deliberate decision partly intended to help grow football's popularity within a country where other sports had traditionally dominated public attention. The tournament proved genuinely successful, helping establish a stronger, more lasting foundation for football's continued growth throughout North America. In 1998, the tournament expanded further still, growing to accommodate 32 participating national teams, providing considerably more nations with genuine opportunity to experience World Cup competition firsthand. This steady, deliberate expansion reflected something genuinely important about the tournament's evolving underlying philosophy. What had originally begun as a relatively small gathering of 13 teams, primarily representing Europe and South America, was gradually transforming into something considerably closer to Jules Rimet's original ambitious vision, a genuinely global celebration, deliberately structured to include nations from every meaningfully populated region of the entire world, rather than remaining permanently concentrated among a small handful of traditionally dominant footballing powers. There is a valuable truth worth remembering from this particular period of gradual, deliberate growth. Genuine global unity rarely happens automatically or immediately. It typically requires sustained, deliberate effort, extended patiently across many years and even decades, gradually widening access and genuine opportunity to groups who might otherwise remain permanently excluded from full, meaningful participation. Chapter 11. A Continent's First Turn. In 2010, the World Cup reached another genuinely historic milestone, being hosted for the very first time on the African continent, specifically in South Africa. This particular tournament carried enormous symbolic weight, representing a powerful, tangible statement that football's most prestigious global tournament truly belonged to the entire world, rather than remaining permanently confined to wealthier, traditionally established footballing regions alone. The South African tournament introduced its own distinctive, memorable cultural elements to World Cup history, including the widespread use of the vuvuzela, a long plastic horn whose distinctive buzzing sound became instantly, permanently associated with that particular tournament in the memory of viewers worldwide. Beyond these particular cultural details, the tournament itself represented genuine, meaningful progress toward the truly global, inclusive vision Rimet had originally articulated many decades earlier. Hosting a tournament of this genuine scale and complexity required significant investment and considerable organizational effort from South Africa, and the country's ultimately successful execution helped demonstrate, clearly and convincingly, that nations outside football's traditionally established European and South American powerhouses were genuinely capable of successfully hosting and managing an event of this considerable global magnitude. There is something genuinely meaningful worth remembering from this particular milestone tournament. Representation matters considerably, not merely as an abstract, symbolic principle, but as tangible, lived proof that a shared global institution genuinely belongs equally to everyone participating within it, rather than remaining permanently controlled by whichever specific groups happen to hold power and influence during that institution's original, earlier years. Chapter 12. The Biggest Stage Yet. The World Cup has continued its steady expansion into the present day. This year, in 2026, the tournament reached its largest scale in history, jointly hosted across 3 North American nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and featuring 48 participating national teams, considerably more than any previous edition of the tournament. This particular expansion provided meaningfully greater opportunity for nations across every populated continent to genuinely experience World Cup competition, continuing the same steady, deliberate widening of participation that had begun several decades earlier. This most recent tournament also produced genuinely dramatic, memorable football on its own merits. Spain ultimately triumphed in the tournament's decisive final, defeating Argentina 1-0 after an intensely fought extra-time period, while England claimed third place following a thrilling, high-scoring match against France. These particular results, still fresh in football's collective memory as this very video is being recorded, represent simply the latest chapter within a tournament story now stretching back nearly 1 full century. Consider for a moment the genuinely remarkable distance this tournament has traveled since its uncertain, fragile beginning. From 13 teams, 4 of which barely managed to cross the Atlantic Ocean aboard a single small ship, to 48 nations competing across an entire continent, watched by billions of people across virtually every country on Earth. The specific teams, players, and champions have continuously changed across each new tournament, yet the underlying spirit Jules Rimet originally imagined, nations set momentarily aside from their genuine differences, joined together through shared passion for a wonderfully simple game, remains genuinely, remarkably intact. Chapter 13. More People Than Any Religion. Step back now and consider the complete, remarkable shape of this extraordinary institutional journey. A grocer's son who became a genuine romantic visionary, believing football could help heal a world still recovering from devastating war. A single formal vote cast in Amsterdam that quietly set an entire century of history into motion. A fragile, uncertain first tournament that nearly failed simply due to the practical difficulty of ocean travel. A trophy hidden inside an ordinary shoebox to protect it from Nazi forces. A national heartbreak so profound it permanently reshaped an entire country's football culture and even their team's traditional uniform colors. A missing trophy recovered by an ordinary neighborhood dog. A cherished golden trophy eventually lost forever, not to war, but to ordinary human greed. Decades of steady, deliberate expansion, gradually welcoming nations from every meaningfully populated corner of the globe. A historic first tournament hosted on African soil. And finally, this year's tournament, the largest and most widely inclusive in the entire tournament's long history. None of this remarkable growth happened automatically or by simple accident. It happened through deliberate vision, sustained institutional courage, and countless individual people, from FIFA presidents to ordinary football officials hiding trophies beneath their own beds, who genuinely believed this particular tournament was worth protecting and continuously nurturing, even during history's most genuinely difficult, uncertain periods. So here is the real question worth carrying away from this story today. Not only as English learners practicing your listening skills, but as people thinking about what genuinely brings different communities together in your own life and your own world. What shared experiences in your own life function similarly to what Jules Rimet originally imagined? Moments capable of temporarily setting aside genuine differences in favor of shared common purpose. And what would it take, in your own particular community, to build something capable of uniting people as consistently and as powerfully as this simple game has managed to unite an entire world, tournament after tournament, for nearly 100 remarkable years? The FIFA World Cup did not become the most widely watched event in human history, because football is inherently more important than other, more serious human concerns. It became that because one stubborn romantic man and countless others who shared his particular vision across the following century genuinely believed that a simple, universal game, played with nothing more than a ball in open space, could help remind an often divided world exactly how much people everywhere genuinely have in common. That brings us to the end of today's story. If you understood most of what you just listened to, that is real, measurable progress in your English listening skills. If certain parts felt difficult or moved quickly, that is completely normal and nothing to feel discouraged about at all. Listen again, whenever you need to. Repetition, as we always say here on English Lane, is exactly where genuine fluency quietly grows over time. Thank you sincerely for spending this time with us today. If this story of unity, heartbreak, and shared global passion moved you or helped your English even a little bit today, please subscribe to English Lane so you never miss the next true story we bring you next. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep believing in whatever simple shared passion might one day help bring your own world a little closer together. We will see you in the next video.